Big Apple Blitz with Anthony Rivardo and Matt O'Leary.
Hello and welcome to another Big Apple Blitz. What is going on? Matt O'Leary alongside Anthony Rivardo. Anthony, congrats on the number one pick, my friend. Giants on the clock.
Never thought that I'd see the day. I thought the closest I would get in my lifetime was the number 2 pick in 2018, used on Saquon Barkley. But I guess you could argue that that moment onward, it was all downhill from there, really. So, I mean, listen, is it guaranteed just yet? No, but I really can't see the Giants winning any more games this season. They're such an atrocity. So it feels pretty good to know that we have easily the highest chance of getting the number 1 overall pick. But now it's just about who's going to be making that pick and will they get it right? That is the big question.
It is a huge question for the New York Giants, something we discussed at length. The Giants lose their 10th straight to drop to 2-13, in large part due to tank commander Drew Lock throwing 2 pick sixes. And you got the Vegas Raiders beating the Jacksonville Jaguars. So they fall all the way down to pick number 6. A lot of help on the Giants side yesterday as well.
Yeah, plenty of help. And listen, now, I mean, the Giants are going to be sitting in a perfect position where if they want to trade down, they can get an absolute haul because those quarterback-needy teams are now even further down the board. Or if they want to stick and pick, I mean, they can take whoever they want. And that's what I want to see happen. I don't want the Giants to have any built-in excuses, right? Like if they were picking 2nd overall and Cam Ward went 1 and then they took Shedeur Sanders at 2, they'd be able to say, well, we really wanted Cam Ward. We had to settle for our second favorite guy. No excuses now. You can take whoever you want at pick number 1, so you better go ahead and take him, and he better be the guy that you kind of hype him up to be. But again, it really just depends who's making the pick, though, because if it's Joe Shane, it's going to be one guy, and if it's not Joe Shane, it could be somebody completely different, or it could be a trade down. So it's definitely going to be an exciting offseason, and I'm very happy that the Giants are going to be able to position themselves to make the move necessary to fix the franchise.
Yeah, and that's just it, right? Like the number 1 pick allows you there's no caveat of, someone went in front of us. We didn't get the guy that we wanted. It was clear in the Hard Knocks episodes, at least, that the Giants were very interested in trading up with the Patriots, trying to get a quarterback, and they weren't able to do so. They end up sticking and picking. They take Malik Neighbors, who we like a lot, but they don't come away with the quarterback last year. They're in a spot now. I agree with you. I don't think they could afford to pass up on a quarterback again at this point. But then you get into the debate of is there anyone in this draft class, and are the guys at the top of the draft worthy to go that high in comparison to what you were looking at just a year ago?
And that's a fantastic question. And while I probably wouldn't feel that way, I mean, let's say, for example, I liked J.J. McCarthy a lot last year. I was definitely willing to take him with a number 6 overall pick. Do I think that he was worthy of the number 1 overall pick? No. So if I think that J.J. McCarthy is arguably as good as Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders, do I think that they are worthy of the number 1 overall pick? No. But you have to take them anyway. At the quarterback position, it's the one position where you're allowed to reach drastically in the draft because you just need to throw a dart at the board and hope that everybody's got their projections wrong, their scouting reports are a little bit off, and that the ceiling is greater than what you expect it to be. That's the one position where you make the argument. You hope that the ceiling is there for the quarterbacks in a way that you don't hope for a wide receiver. The wide receiver ceiling being high is not the same thing as the quarterback ceiling being high. So you have to roll the dice at the quarterback position. And man, I don't know. Is Shedeur a number 1 pick? Is Cam Ward a number 1 pick? I'm not entirely convinced that either one of them have that level of talent, but I am convinced that the Giants have a severe lack of talent all across the board, especially at quarterback after watching Drew Lock, Tim Boyle, Tommy DeVito, and Daniel Jones play this season. Give yourself anybody that has potential. Shedeur has potential. Cam Ward has potential. You got to get some potential in the building even if the ceiling isn't as high or the floor isn't as high as a Penix or a McCarthy, it doesn't matter. You got to take the quarterback anyway just to give your franchise an opportunity.
Now it's December 23rd, and a lot can change in the next 4 months. And I'm not going to hold this to you when we get to April here. But as of now, what is your feel for the Giants? Is it Shedeur Sanders, who I put on the graphic? Is it Cam Ward? I know it feels like we're getting maybe some mixed signals, like Joe Shane obviously doing a lot with Shedeur and going out to see him and even at practices. And then you had the thing last week that we played on the show with Deion Sanders talking about the Giants and Shedeur. But also we've seen reports that the Giants have interest in Cam too. So it's not like they've this entire time been like it's Shedeur or bust, but I'm kind of just curious to see what you're hearing or how you feel about it.
So how I feel about it, my preference, I still do like Cam Ward a little bit more than Shedeur Sanders. If it were up to me, that's who I would take, and that's where my preference would lean. However, if I had to make a prediction, I think the Giants are going to take Shedeur Sanders. I think that he is going to be the more popular and hot name among NFL circles because he's got an NFL Hall of Fame bloodline. And I think that means a lot to people inside of the league. The league is a relationships business, and that's a major relationship for teams to have, potentially one with Deion, or just the fact that the Sanders family has a relationship with the NFL. That's very important, and that's going to help Shedeur Sanders. And that's not to discredit him and say that he's not a capable prospect or he's not worthy of being drafted high. He is. He's great. Plus, he has those connections to the NFL with a Hall of Fame bloodline, on top of the fact that he's very talented. But when you're looking at the way that Joe Shane and his front office have operated this season, they've spent a ridiculous amount of time at Colorado. I saw videos of Brandon Brown, the assistant GM, breaking down the huddle at Colorado's practice and giving life lesson speeches on the practice field. They love Colorado. They love the players there, and they clearly have their eye on Shedeur Sanders. So if Joe Shane is retained, I feel pretty confident they're going to take Sanders with the number 1 overall pick. If he is not retained, if he is fired, if the Giants clean house, I think it's all the way up in the air, and it's probably going to be decided over the next couple months in the pre-draft process. And I do think a lot of that has to do with the fact that, or has to do with where the media lands on these two guys. Right now, I would say it sounds like the media leans towards Sanders being the number 1 overall pick. But again, as we get through bowl games, or if we get through the combine and we get through pre-draft interviews and all these different things, we know how the media narratives can shift. At this time last year, J.J. McCarthy, no way in hell he was number 1 overall or a first-round pick. He ended up going number 10 overall in April. So a lot can change. Right now, again, like I said, it seems like people are leaning Shedeur. By the time we get to April, it could be Cam Ward, and maybe Cam Ward is the consensus number 1 guy. That's who the Giants take. But if I had to take a guess right now, if it's Shane drafting, it's going to be Shedeur Sanders in the Big Apple.
That I feel the same way. I think it would be Shedeur if they're retaining Joe Shane. Which my theory is that they are. I know we talked about that last week, and you're not necessarily sold on that. And look, this isn't me saying that I'm campaigning for the Giants to keep Joe Shane. I think they should clear house, but I think there's a greater chance that they just keep Shane and scapegoat Brian Dable here. And if that's the case, then I think it's going to be heavily favored that Shedeur Sanders is going to be the number 1 overall pick. What's tough is, as you said, like there is a chance that it's not. And then, it's going to be all dependent on what that next general manager, how they feel about this quarterback class. And it may be a little bit more challenging to find out because it's not like they have a track record as a GM, depending on who the candidate is, I guess. If it's someone who was a GM at one point and drafted someone, maybe you'd have a better idea on how they evaluate quarterbacks. But it's going to be really interesting to see how the next few months play out. Again, it's crazy early. 4 months from now is essentially when the NFL draft is. But at least from my perspective, I always find it interesting to track how much things change over the time from like this period, the end of the NFL season, until we get up to the NFL draft.
It's always interesting because there's a bunch of analyzing that's going to take place as soon as the NFL season ends, because most teams turn their attention toward the draft or free agency. So there's a period of analysis. And then after a while, it becomes a period of over-analysis. And that's where things really start to change. And I always find that phase of the pre-draft process to be the most eye-opening. The way that certain players fly inexplicably up the draft board, even though maybe they don't have that kind of talent, but all of a sudden their first-round pick, Austin Jackson, was the Miami Dolphins offensive tackle that was selected a couple years ago. He came out of nowhere. Nobody expected him to be a first-round pick. He shouldn't have been. He ends up getting drafted in the first round. He ends up bottoming out of the league in like a year. We see stuff like that happen all the time, and a lot of it, I feel, is sparked by agents pushing narratives to teams, and then those teams and those media markets really pushing things. So we'll see how things get pushed throughout the next couple of months. But like I said, I think we got an analysis period coming up and then an over-analysis period where names start to fly up boards or fall down boards. And then it's all going to culminate in April with the draft. But the quarterback position, of course, is the most overanalyzed position in all of sports. Every player that plays that position is under a microscope. So if you're curious about the strengths, weaknesses, red flags, green flags with all of these prospects at quarterback, you'll hear all of them over and over and over again until April. And it's just going to be, where do the Giants land in any of these debates about these guys, and what do they value in the quarterback position? And again, we just don't know that right now because of the lack of certainty as to who's going to be the decision maker.
Wanted to get into some of the comments here. You have Justin hanging with us, says, thank you, Antonio Pierce. Once a Giant, always a Giant. Thank you, Raiders, for an early Christmas gift to a horrendous, embarrassing 100th season. One last parting gift for Antonio Pierce to the New York Giants here, Super Bowl champ.
Yeah, shout out to AP. Clutch win for the Raiders yesterday. But also, I like the ending here from Justin, a gift during a horrendous, embarrassing 100th season. I think it's really important to note, this is season 100. This was supposed to be a celebratory year. John Mara wanted to have events throughout the season, had to cancel all of that crap. And now we have the longest losing streak in franchise history of 10 games. It sets a record. So I don't know how much worse it can get. I think that you could argue this is the worst New York Giants team of all time. And if you retain the general manager, head coach, like if you retain people, this is the worst in 100 years of the franchise. I don't see how they survive. So like you said earlier, your working theory is that they're going to keep Shane. They're going to scapegoat Dable. A lot of people feel that way. I don't, simply because I think that John Mara is going to look at it. He's going to see a 10-game losing streak, and he's just going to clean house because of that reason alone.
Yeah, I was looking up the Giants history as you were talking. You have the 1966 New York Giants sitting at 112-1. Maybe you say that team was worse. Clearly they were not very good that year, finished 8th out of 8 teams in the division. There's been some other 2-win seasons for the Giants in 47, 64, 73, and 74. But a 15-loss season would be by far the most, because 13 is the highest number of games that they have ever lost as a franchise. So uncharted territory for this Giants team. And what, again, as Justin and you point out, 100th season is supposed to be celebratory. Like, I don't know, you see the merch of like when the Yankees had their 100th season and like the campaigns that they would do. And like, I don't know, is anyone going to be rocking a 100th season Giants sweatshirt? I don't really think so after this year.
Don't see why you would. I mean, even the 100th season jerseys were ugly as sin. The ones that they wore in week 1, the red and the tan pants, the whole season has just been a mess. Like, the train flew off the rails, and I don't know where they went wrong. I mean, we can pinpoint many different places where mistakes were made, but it's just so disappointing. You know, you get all of your hopes up throughout the offseason for the regular season. And I think it's important to put in perspective, when we did our preseason predictions for our teams, I had this team winning 5 games. I wasn't optimistic about it. I didn't think they would be a good team, but I definitely did not see them being this bad. This is the worst that they possibly could be, and I didn't even see that coming. So even if you knew that this season wasn't going to be that great, even if Joe Shane argued to John Mara, hey, this is going to be a rebuilding year, this is not what we expected. This is way worse than anyone imagined it could have been. So for that reason, like I keep saying, heads have to roll. Like, changes need to be made, but I will continue to make the argument that John Mara needs to look at himself before he makes these changes to the front office and the coaching staff. He needs to make changes in his own operations, and whether that's bringing in somebody like, you know, a team president of football operations, whatever it is, the organization needs to make structural changes to ensure that something like this never happens again, especially coming out of their centennial season.
Absolutely. A few more comments in here. Rico the pup says, I wonder how much the drama surrounding Shador affects the team's decision. Like, would Dion start talking if he gets off to a slow start? New York media would have a field day with that. Is this something that crosses your mind at all when looking at Shador?
It crosses my mind because everybody brings it up, but it's not something that I personally care about. I really don't. If they go through the interview process and they feel that Shador is focused on football and his family's not going to be a problem and he just wants to win, then you take him. Again, it's all predicated on the pre-draft process, and a lot of that is going to come from the NFL scouting combine. When the Giants and all these other franchises get to sit down in a private room and talk to Shador Sanders, cameras off, ask him legitimate, difficult questions, ask him about his family, and ask him how he would respond to certain scenarios, that's when we'll get an idea of how much of an influence Dion is going to have over him. And I really don't think it's that much of a problem that Deion Sanders, a Hall of Famer and now accomplished head coach for a college football program that was previously really bad. He turned them into a good program. The guy is clearly a great mind. I don't mind having him involved with his son's future. I think that would actually be a benefit, a plus. It's a guy that's not on the Giants staff that would potentially be helping the Giants. So it doesn't bother me at all, really. Again, I have to talk about it because people keep asking me about it, but it's not something that bothers me at all. I like players with a voice. I like players with personality. I like players who speak their mind. Shador Sanders does all those things. Malik Neighbors does all those things. The NY media, they try and run those guys out of town. F them. I can't stand it. Like with the whole Malik Neighbors Travis Scott concert earlier this season. Yeah, if we draft Shador, are we going to have more ridiculous moments like that? Probably, but it's a 24-hour news cycle, and at the end of the day, none of it matters if the quarterback is leading the team to wins. So if Shador Sanders steps in here and they believe he's the best chance of winning football games, you draft him and you say to hell with all the other BS. It doesn't matter. All that matters is winning football games. And Shador Sanders is a good player who will win a team football games. Therefore, you take the winning player and the rest of it, you figure out later.
Yeah, I think that's the right way to look at it, by the way. I was just curious to see what your thoughts on that was. And at least on the Giants side of things, I think they'd be able to put Sanders in a situation where you're not going to get those kind of things out of Dion. Dion likes the Giants. We played the video last week, and there's been many examples, brought up in the past of, Dion showing the Giants some love. First State says seems like a very un-Giant like thing to do, but obviously it's been such a train wreck. Maybe the Giants need to do the opposite of the Giant like thing. I assume this is on the Sanders conversation here.
Yeah, I think so. And that's kind of the argument that I'm making there. It's a pretty good way to put it. Like the Giants way right now is dead. They need to come up with a new Giants way. The Giants way currently would say, hey, if the guy attracts a lot of media attention, we don't want him here. Why? Because he's going to win you more games. I want him here if he's going to win me more games. I don't care about the Giants way. I don't care about the media attention. And that's what the Giants have done. I think over the last 10 years, they've been afraid of the New York media, and they've allowed their fear of the New York media to stronghold them and to change the way that they operate and to influence their decisions. They need to finally block out the outside noise. They can't have their PR director calling people in the media and creating more problems, because that clearly indicates that they do listen to the media and that the media does influence their decision making. So if that's the case, they need to fix that first and foremost. Don't allow the media to influence your decision making. It's very clear that when they traded Odell Beckham Jr., who at the time was on a Hall of Fame trajectory, a lot of it had to do with the media influencing that decision. Whether it was the right or wrong decision in the long run doesn't matter. The point being, the media influences just about everything that the New York Giants do. Whether you want to talk about Saquon Barkley, you want to talk about Daniel Jones, the media has too much of a hand to play in the front office. They need to fix that first and foremost and just start trying to build a good football team and not living in fear of criticism of the New York media market.
That's a great way to put it. Living in fear or worrying about, because my team does this too. The Jets often worry about what the opinions of the media or the fans or, any pundits are going to be, rather than trying to do things the way that they think maybe is the best way to go about doing it. So I'm with you.
Yeah, I think that the Detroit Lions are the example for pretty much all teams to follow right now in almost every facet of building a team. But I think in that facet, especially because when they made the move for Jared Goff, they were criticized to hell. Everybody's like, this is a downgrade. Stafford's a better player. Why would you give this up and that up and just to bring in Goff? He's washed up. Well, now Jared Goff is a legitimate MVP caliber quarterback. When they brought in Dan Campbell, oh, he's just a talking guy. Players, coaches don't work. He's not going to be able to strategize. Now he's arguably a top 5 head coach in the NFL. Oh, after the first year of Dan Campbell, they should fire him, move on. Well, he turned it around, and now the Detroit Lions are a true powerhouse. So I think that's a really great example, again, for how they strategize, how they build their roster. They're a great example of everything, which is why their coordinators and front office execs are going to be popular names for teams like the Giants and the Jets this offseason. But I also think the Lions should be highlighted for their ability to weather the storm and not pay attention to the media and not let the media influence them and just do what they feel is best, get the right people in the building, and then build a championship caliber roster.
I like it. I think that's the way to approach it. I think teams are going to be trying to poach guys from the Lions for both front office positions and coaching spots. You look at, Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn and John Dorsey and Ray Agnew. I think a lot of guys are going to end up being poached from the Lions for how they were able to turn some things around. Want to get into the Jet side of things for today and talk some Garrett Wilson as he is unhappy, ? I want to pull up a clip from the post game. We'll listen to it and then react here on Big Apple Blitz.
You were not involved much until late in the fourth quarter. Why was it?
I don't know. To be honest with you, man, I don't know. I just got to go out and put my best foot forward and hope that things fall my way. I would love to be involved, love to make an impact on the game, but people see it differently than that's outside of my control. So just try and do what I can do.
There we go. Your thoughts on Garrett Wilson's post-game comments?
Get ready to learn New York Giants, buddy.
Oh, don't do that to me. All right, then I guess you're giving up the number 1 pick.
Yeah, I don't quite think that's the case. But hey, pick number 33 or whatever it would be, very high in the second round. That might be enough to persuade the Jets, possibly, maybe. I don't know. I mean, listen, I think Garrett Wilson, we were kind of talking about a little bit off air before we started. Incredible talent. Misused, underutilized, especially since the Davante Adams trade. His usage has gone down and his ability to impact the game has been dampened by the Adams trade. And I think that there's a disconnect between the coaching staff, the organization, the quarterback especially. None of them are on the same page as Garrett Wilson. And I think another team around the NFL would be thrilled to have a talent like that. So the Jets need to figure out what the problem is and how they can make him happy, whether that be paying him, whether that be changing his role. Doesn't matter. They have to do something to fix this because Garrett Wilson is a true stud, a true young rising star. You cannot waste his talents. You cannot squander him and allow him to become so unhappy to where he forces his way out of New York.
So I fully agree with you, by the way. I was trying to pull it up on the fly here, but was struggling. But because the pushback that you'll get whenever you say that, like for instance, in this past game, Davante Adams had 13 targets and Garrett Wilson ended up finishing with 7. Now, it was 4 for most of the game up until the final drive or final possession that the Jets had the ball, and he was targeted 3 times. So that inflated it at the end. But at one point, it was essentially triple the targets for Davante Adams versus Garrett Wilson. And they'll go, well, Garrett has 141 targets on the year, and he has 90 catches already with 2 games to go. He's going to finish with over 100 catches probably and be a 1,000-yard receiver again. What do you mean? He's one of the most targeted guys in the NFL. It's a little, I feel like that's a little bit misleading, Anthony, because yes, is it true that he's going to finish with probably over 100 receptions or right around 100 receptions and a bunch of targets again this year? Yes, that's the case. But it's also the way that those targets are coming. And in a game like this, honestly, feel like wise, and I know you were probably focused on the Giants and didn't get to see much of this game, but after Rodgers had Davante Adams for the first touchdown to get to 499 career passing touchdowns, it felt like he was trying to force feed Davante so Davante could be number 500. That's the feel, because I don't know how else you can explain a 4th and 4 end zone fade 20 yards down the field when Garrett Wilson was on an in-breaking slant wide open that could have picked up the first down.
No explanation for it, but I will say that is kind of the vibe that I got as well. And also, I wouldn't put that past Aaron Rodgers, Mr. I love the cameras and I love hearing myself talk. So I can't imagine that didn't cross his mind. I have to feel like he probably wanted to build the best story for himself possible rather than the best moment for the New York Jets. And I know that the Jets, I mean, they're eliminated. They're not playing for much, but at the end of the day, these players are playing for themselves and they're playing for their careers and their livelihoods, their families. Garrett Wilson's there. He's open. Give him the ball if he's the right player to hit on that play. I mean, the fourth down fade that you just mentioned was egregious. It was ridiculous. And we've seen so many plays just like that. Aaron Rodgers forcing the ball downfield to Davante Adams, trying to make a big play where there isn't one just because he wants to stat pad or whatever it is. I don't know. I'm clearly, as you can tell, not a big fan of Aaron Rodgers, and I've grown really cold on him throughout the season. But Garrett Wilson, he's open on that play. That could have been a game-winning play or whatever, and he passes him over just to get the highlight reel so he can talk on the Pat McAfee show. It's ridiculous.
Johnny Boy says Garrett wants to win. It's as simple as that. I think that's a big part of it too. The amount of times that or just losing that they've gone through and frustrating seasons. Each of Garrett Wilson's 3 seasons has been frustrating year after frustrating year. Rookie year, they start 7-4 and then lose 6 straight games to finish 7-10 and miss the playoffs. Last year, we know that Aaron Rodgers injury happens and the offense was horrible and they somehow scrape and claw to 7-10. And now this year you went into it with high expectations, expecting to be a playoff team this year. And you're sitting at 4-11 with 2 games to go. And, you're targeted 4 times through the first, 50 minutes of the game. It's a little ridiculous. And look, I like Davante Adams. I think he's been really good with the Jets, but it doesn't make any sense for him to be double the targets of the next guy. Like the whole point of the Jets bringing in Davante Adams, at least in my opinion of what it should have been, was that you're able to spread the wealth. And there's so many ways that the Jets offense could attack you with Breece Hall and Garrett Wilson and Tyler Conklin and Davante Adams. But it turned into, in this game, especially in the second half, where it felt like it was the Davante Adams show. And that's the part that bothers me.
It bothers me as well. I mean, like I said, I feel like it's just Rodgers trying to build stories for the media. It's so funny that the media influence of things has come up so many times in these discussions for both the Giants and the Jets. I mean, I get that the NFL is a very media-centric league. It matters what you do and how to market it, but I don't know. I think that there's just been an influence from the media on both of these teams in different ways in the way that they're operating. And on Aaron Rodgers, it's a little bit different. You're a player, I feel, is feeling media impact and influence, and it's affecting the way that you're playing. I think Davante Adams, for what it's worth, is a really good player, still is, even at his veteran age. I think it was a good trade when you look back on it, but at the same time, it came at the expense of Garrett Wilson's success, of the team's success, and even Mike Williams. So they shipped him out midway through the year. I think that a lot of his targets could have been, or a lot of Davante Adams' targets could have been soaked up by Mike Williams, and I still believe in him as being a pretty good player. So there's just a lot going on here with Aaron Rodgers and his reliance on Davante Adams that I think is getting in the way of the offense becoming functional.
Yeah, and First State says get with the modern NFL, but the comment before that was pay him and get an offensive coach who could use him properly, problem solved. It might be quarterback too, offensive coach and quarterback who can use him properly.
I think Tyrod Taylor would absolutely cook with Garrett Wilson. I don't think we're going to see Tyrod this year. I think Aaron Rodgers is going to stay in the lineup. But listen, I mean, Tyrod Taylor's pretty good, and he'll be around next year. He's on the 2-year deal for the Jets, so he'll be on their contract. He'll be with the team more than likely, barring anything unforeseen. If he ends up being the guy who starts the season under center, maybe with a rookie underneath him or whatever, I think that would be really exciting. I think Garrett Wilson is still, or I think Tyrod Taylor is still a good player, and I'd be really excited to see him and Garrett Wilson pair up.
If Joe Flacco at 51 years old last year and Mason Rudolph can start playoff games, I think Tyrod Taylor could start a playoff game. I still got the faith in Tyrod, but I don't know if that's the direction that they will end up going. Johnny Boy brings up a good point. In another quote, he was mentioning Mike LaFleur because the Jets played the Rams, and Mike LaFleur, former offensive coordinator with the New York Jets, is now the offensive coordinator for the Rams. And he was talking about how he took it for granted. And Johnny interpreted that as a shot to Hackett and Downing. And in a way, I kind of see it that way, not necessarily for like the get me the ball, but just in the style of offense they ran. In 21 and 22, they did things that a more modern NFL offense does. The last 2 years has been a very dated, I think is the best way to put it, style of offensive play with both Nathaniel Hackett and I guess Todd Downing too.
Yeah, I mean, just the overall talk about the offensive coordinator position going into the year, that was the number one thing that we highlighted as our main concern with the New York Jets. We didn't believe in the offensive coaching staff, and that's been their undoing this season. I think that is an interesting quote. I would consider that a shot. I would consider that some subtle shade being thrown, and I think it's well deserved because the Jets haven't figured out how to utilize any of their players properly this year, I think, on the offensive side of things. And I think it even connects to the fade route that we just talked about on 4th and 4. I mean, how many fades do you think Aaron Rodgers has thrown this year? Just back shoulder fades all game long. I mean, we've seen so many of them. Yeah, probably 100 throughout the season. If you look around the NFL, there is not another team in the league that relies on the back shoulder fade the way that the New York Jets do. And that is an Aaron Rodgers influence. That is clear and obvious correlation to Aaron Rodgers being the quarterback. The back shoulder fade is at best a 50-50 ball. You don't rely on 50-50 balls in crucial moments of the game. Look at the Chiefs, the Rams, they just played. Look at all of the best offenses, best teams, best coaches. They find ways to scheme things open, get guys wide open in space using good play calling. The Jets don't have that. They're lacking in that crucial element to their offense. Giants are too, for what it's worth, but the Jets do not have the ability to scheme players open right now and instead are relying on the perceived talent of a 40-plus-year-old quarterback and some other wide receivers to be on the same page at the right time and make fade contested catches. That's not how you win in the NFL level. And so Garrett Wilson has every right to be upset, every right to be annoyed, and every right to be vocal about it because he knows, and we all know, that there are other ways to win football games. And the way that the Jets are doing it, that is not how you do it.
Rico says, I disagree, Matt. I think Garrett Wilson proved he can be productive regardless of the quarterback. He just needs to be legitimately featured and win. D-Hop produced with the Texans with multiple quarterbacks. I think Garrett Wilson is that guy. Yeah, I agree. I don't think I said otherwise. He's going to have his third straight 1,000-yard season to start his career. I just think he's frustrated. And I think it has everything to do with, them losing games and the kind of offense that they're running. I never said anything about him not being productive.
He's definitely productive. He's going to go for 1,000 yards, like you said, 3 seasons in a row. I think he is one of the few quarterback-proof wide receivers. I think Neighbors is proving to be one as well. The fact that both of these guys are going to go for 1,000 yards, considering the seasons that they've had and the circumstances surrounding them, it shows that they are rising stars. But with Wilson, I mean, listen, you mentioned it. Some of the quarterbacks that he's played with over the last 2 years, he didn't even get to play with Rodgers last year. He had a lot of Zach Wilson, Tim Boyle at one point, I believe. Right, Garrett Wilson and Tim Boyle were on the same. Yeah, they were on the field together. If you're catching passes from Tim Boyle at any point in a season and you're still going for 1,000 yards, you're a true star. I think that's true for Neighbors and Wilson alike.
Trevor Siemian, Mike White, Joe Flacco, Zach Wilson. There you go. That's the rounding out of quarterbacks that he has caught passes from this year.
Makes everything more impressive. Everything that Wilson has done to this point even more impressive.
Yeah,
the quarterbacks that he's had to play with.
My take, pay him. I think you need to get a legitimate, coach in here, sell him on the plan, and if you put a contract in front of him, if you go, we're going to give you 4 for 120, I think he stays. And that's still my prediction. I know things don't look great right now, clearly, and like that's the thing that people are going to run with. Like everyone's going to have their mock, trade proposals for the New York Jets for Garrett Wilson. Garrett Wilson's the exact kind of guy that I would want to pay. He's the first guy from the 2022 class that I would put an emphasis on paying whatever it takes. And I think it's going to be around $30 million a year. And I would be more than comfortable doing that for Garrett. I think he's earned it and proven that he's worth it.
I think so too. I would be willing to pay Garrett Wilson. In fact, I'm hoping that the New York Giants are and the New York Jets aren't. So we'll see how that shakes out in the offseason.
Rico says, don't forget the phenomenal talent that was Chris Streveler. I did forget Chris Streveler. He came in against the Jacksonville Jaguars in 2022 to replace Zach Wilson.
Don't even know who that is. Don't want to know.
You don't.
Just make me more depressed.
a preseason arm that ended up being thrown into a game and got a huge standing ovation on Thursday Night Football because he completed a pass to CJ Uzama that was thrown like 10 yards behind him that he had to come back for. Probably should have been a touchdown, but nonetheless, yeah, this just goes to show you, like, it's pretty wild again that Garrett in his career, 1,100 yards as a rookie, 1042 last year. He has 987 through 15 games, so he's 13 yards away again from going over 1,000 with the kind of offenses and coaches and quarterbacks that he's played for. He's not even 25 years old yet. He won't turn 25 until July. So, like, again, just do whatever it takes, man. I don't want to trade this guy.
I mean, I want you to trade him. So I don't know what to say. I hope they trade him to the Giants. I think that you got a player like Neighbors on the outside, and if you could have Garrett Wilson operating out of the slot, you take Wan'Dale Robinson, maybe you put him in the return package for the Jets. Hey, Wan'Dale's pretty good, or you send him to the moon. I don't care. If we could get a 1-2 punch of Neighbors and Wilson, I will be happy. So we're gonna have to disagree on our hope for Garrett Wilson's future.
So you're going to take Garrett Wilson and DJ Reed from me for this offseason? Two of my guys?
That's the plan. That is the plan if I were GM of the Giants, is to acquire those two guys somehow. Don't know if it's possible to bring them both in the same offseason, but I'm doing whatever I can to make it happen.
First State Jet says, how many wide receivers tried the disgruntled route and they all signed the big deal and got paid for the teams? It's a fair point. Just a couple years ago, the negotiations with Quinn and Williams were a little testy at times. So, yeah, look, he's due a new deal and maybe he's playing the leverage game. But the weird part is I know, like, his post-game comments and his tone don't sound great, but he's always gone out of his way to talk about how he wants to be here and wants to be here for the turnaround too. So I feel very mixed on this right now.
I think a lot of players say that, though, and then when they get a better opportunity, Saquon Barkley's a good example of that. He's like, I'm a Giant for life. I'm a Giant for life. And I mean, that's not really his fault. Giants didn't offer him the money he was seeking. Philly did. But there are some wide receivers who were disgruntled and then they got traded. I mean, if you want to go historically, Randy Moss is a great example when he got traded to the Patriots. Or if you want to go more recently, A.J. Brown was disgruntled and the Titans traded him to the Eagles. So it happens. I think probably more so at the wide receiver position than any other. They get disgruntled. Yes, a lot of them do get big deals paid, and then they're quieter and they just continue to ball out for their team. But I think at wide receiver, more so than any other position, they get loud and disgruntled and they do get traded. So even if they're not requesting a trade, like Odell Beckham Jr. was loud and disgruntled, and he was vocal with his frustrations over the team, but adamant that he didn't want to leave no matter what. And then they traded him anyway. So I think at wide receiver, you've got a higher chance of being traded if you talk a lot in the media. So I would say whether Garrett Wilson wants to be or not, he should be on notice of the recent history for wide receivers getting shipped off.
I'm nervous. Now, another thing to worry about. I got to worry about who the quarterback's going to be, who the GM is going to be, who the coach is going to be, and maybe having to trade away Garrett Wilson. Fantastic.
But you do have to keep in mind that because you've got a new GM coming in, anybody could be traded. There's always the GMs that come in and say, hey, these are not my guys. We're going to replace these guys with my guys. And so you could see somebody like Garrett Wilson, as great as he is, even Quinnen Williams. I think that for every team that hires a new GM, you can consider every player on that team to be on the trade block. Maybe not being shopped, but there's definitely a level of movement that's accepted by a new GM that wasn't there from the previous withstanding GM. So I think Garrett Wilson is going to get calls. There's going to be calls on him regardless. It's just going to be whether or not the new GM is open to the idea, or if he does have a list of untouchable players and puts Garrett Wilson on the list. But I don't think that's going to be the case. I think they're going to get calls personally.
You want to do a mock call of what the Jets should do?
Sure, let's do it.
All right, ring me up.
Ring, ring.
Okay. Hello?
Hi, this is Tony Rivardo from the New York Giants, brand new general manager that was just hired. I'm looking for a wide receiver. What's the price tag on Garrett Wilson?
Click. That's how it should go.
There you go.
There we go. That's your mock trade call.
All right, so what if I call, though, and I'm like, hey, I've got a second-round pick. I've got a decent slot receiver in Wan'Dale Robinson, and then another second-round pick, 2 twos and a player. How about that? Okay, my
phone out, yeah, phone out
broken
the
here.
window.
I got to bring this thing to the Apple store. I'm not sure what's going on.
Yeah, I don't think that would do it.
Yeah, then I'm cornering you at the NFL scouting combine. I'm like, hey, and I bring you into the bathroom. I'm like, give me Garrett Wilson.
And you won't let me leave unless I trade you Garrett Wilson.
Just beat you up in the bathroom, swirly, all that.
I don't want to swirly at the combine. Not what I
Yeah,
want.
well, get used to the Indianapolis Lucas Oil Stadium toilet water.
Get ready to learn swirly, buddy. All right, I think that's going to do it for us in this episode. Able to talk about the Giants getting up to the number 1 pick, Jets, Garrett Wilson drama. It's always something with these two teams, Anthony.
It's always something. It feels like the misery, the drama, all of it just never ends. I wish for us that one day it will, but it's really hard to see the light at the end of this tunnel.
That it is. So we'll leave you with that to chew on. That'll do it for us. I'm Matt. He's Anthony, and we will catch you next time.